In this lesson, we're going to make our stopwatch component functional, so we can start a stopwatch, stop it, and reset its time. And the first thing that we should do is to go to timeline stopwatch component and declare new constant. Let's call this constant seconds. This is going to be a reactive variable which will store current time of the stopwatch. And initially this time gets passed from outside, within seconds prop. So as initial value for this reactive variable, we're gonna use seconds prop, because later we need to update value with a seconds reactive variable every second, and which is why we have created this constant, because we can't modify value of seconds prop directly. And then we're also going to need another state variable, we'll call it isRunning, and this state variable will store current state of our stopwatch, whether it is running or stopped. Of course, initially our stopwatch will be stopped, so initial value will be false. And now what we have to do is to register handlers for every button. So let's create two separate local functions and bind these functions as event handlers. To start our stopwatch, we're going to use function with the name start. The second function will be called stop to stop the stopwatch. And finally, last function is going to be to reset stopwatch time, which will be called reset. And then let's go ahead and register these functions as event handlers for click event. For reset button, we're going to use reset event handler. For stop button, let's use function with the name stop. And for the start button, we're going to use start function. And then let's start implementing each of these functions. So inside of start event handler, we're gonna have to execute some code every second, so that it can update our seconds reactive variable. And in JavaScript, to make some code run in certain intervals, we can use setInterval function. As a first parameter is going to accept closure that will be executed in intervals, and as for the interval itself, we pass the second argument into setInterval function, and we have to execute this function every second, which is why as a second parameter, we're going to pass value of milliseconds in second constant. And that means our closure will be executed every second. And we can easily modify our seconds reactive variable by incrementing it like so. So before checking it out in the browser, let's go up and import necessary function from the Vue package, ref. And now when we will click on a start button, this event handler will get executed, which will register the function to be executed every second. And this function will modify our reactive variable seconds, which will cause Vue to update certain parts of the DOM that depend on this reactive variable. So let's use this seconds variable in the template. So Vue will update this part of the DOM every second. And just because within this component we refer to some props, we need to store all the props within this object, like so. And one more thing, we need to import new constant milliseconds in second. Let's scroll up and add this import in here. So as we can see in the browser, the first stopwatch shows value of seconds 0. That is because initial value of the seconds prop is 0 within timeline stopwatch component. And also local reactive variable seconds also stores value 0. But once I'm going to start our stopwatch by clicking on the start button, right away we see that interface gets updated every second and value of our local reactive variable seconds is modified every second. But right now time is displayed in the wrong format, so we have to go back to timeline stopwatch component. And before displaying the time by using seconds reactive variable in here, firstly we have to format this time. And to format it, we already have a function called formatSeconds, so let's use it. And now our time will be formatted, and when we start the timer, we will see that the time is still shown properly, and the amount of seconds gets incremented. And of course, every stopwatch component on this page is completely independent from each other, and we can start several stopwatches at the same time. So now let's determine how we would stop the stopwatch. For this, we're gonna have to stop our interval, initially defined by using setInterval function. And to have an option to stop this interval in the future, we have to store reference to this interval. So we're gonna use another reactive variable called isRunning. and store reference on our timer within this reactive variable, like so. And then within stop event handler, we will be able to clear this interval by using native function called clear interval. And this function accepts a reference to the timer that we'd like to stop. So previously we have stored reference to the timer within isRunning reactive variable. Therefore, we're passing this value as a param within clear interval function. And in addition to that, we're also going to reset value of isRunning variable by assigning false. So let's check it out. Initially, reactive variable isRunning stores value false. And once I'm going to start the timer right away, we're gonna get number within this variable. And this number is kind of a reference to our timer, started by using setInterval function. And later on, when I decide to stop this timer, I'm just gonna have to click on the stop button. And after that, isRunning variable is back to its initial value, false. And so on. If I'm going to start the timer once again, the reference on the timer will be assigned to isRunning variable. And now there is one more button that we have to work on, which is this reset button. So for the reset button, as a handler, we're gonna use a reset function. And the first thing that we should do in here, once this button will be clicked, is to stop the timer by using another function, stop. Let's call this function right here. And besides stopping the timer, we also have to reset the time. So we're going to assign 0 to seconds reactive variable. And let's check it out. Firstly, let's start this timer. Then let's stop it. Then let's start it again. And finally, let's click on the reset button and see what is going to happen. And just like we have determined, our time gets reset to 0 and interface is updated based on the latest value inside of seconds reactive variable. So looks like so far our stopwatch component works as expected. And now let's do one more improvement, which is we will only show one button at a time, whether it is a start button or stop button, depending on the current state of our stopwatch. And to do this, we're gonna use vuejs directive on base button component, which is responsible for showing stop button, and check if our timer is currently running by using isRunning reactive variable. Then we're gonna use stop button, otherwise our timer is currently stopped, and instead we should show button to start this timer. So let's use else on the start button, like so. And finally in the browser, initially as we can see, only start button gets displayed, and after I start the timer, this button will be replaced by stop button. And when we stop the timer, of course, we're gonna see start button again. And now we are at the good point to finish this lesson. We have successfully implemented functionality to stop, start, and reset stopwatch.